Jeremiah Harris is perhaps one of the most well-known CP growers in the world. He will need little to no introduction. So most of the details I'm filling in right now next are mostly for me to have fun telling you guys about him. You would never know how accomplished Jeremiah Harris is if you met him in person. I first met him in 2018 at the ICPS conference, and immediately I saw how down to earth, eager to help, and easy to approach he was. It didn't matter that to Jeremiah Harris that I was still fairly newish. He still took a picture with me, and I have a poster size of him in my living room. Just kidding. However, Jeremiah has been obsessed with carnivorous plants since he was 5 years old. He founded the Colorado Carnivorous Plant Society in February of 2003 with the hope to meet other carnivorous plant enthusiasts. In addition to growing CPs, Jeremiah enjoys traveling around the world to see plants in the wild. He has gone on numerous trips, and if you ever buy him some lunch, you may hear some interesting stories. Jeremiah holds one of the largest private collections of CPs in the United States of America. Today, Jeremiah will do an unusual thing for us at Skippy. We will see his plants, of course, but he will focus on what he does to cause the conditions to so successfully grow this large and diverse collection, and also what not to do. He's going to share his what to's, how to's, and don't do's, all from his decades of experience. We will see not only one greenhouse, but a few greenhouses, and there will be time between each tour to ask questions. We will also pop up plants from our raffle menu of the day during the breaks while we enjoy this precious opportunity to ask questions.
Hello everyone, I am super excited today because today, instead of focusing more on my plants, I will be focusing on how I grow them, mainly with the focus on my greenhouses. The first one I actually built with my dad and brother's help when I was about 14 to probably 16 years old, and then this last large 1,000 square foot greenhouse was built about 12 years ago. So I'm happy you all could join us today, and let's get going. Hello everyone, we are here to talk about how I cultivate carnivorous plants. So I thought I would start off. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, my dad helped me put in my first greenhouse window. This one is pretty good size. It is 5 foot by 4 foot. It has 3 layers, and at the time I cultivated everything from fly traps, nepenthes, and Sarracenia, all in this window when I was about 12 years old. At that same time, I had just started selling carnivorous plants to a couple local nurseries. They were super cool because if they got in plants that looked like they were about to die, they would actually give them to me. I would try and nurse them back to health using this greenhouse window, and then I would sell them back to the nursery. So this, my parents thought, would last me pretty much my whole life, but little did they know how interested I would become in carnivorous plants. This one lasted me about 3 years, and then when I was about 15 years old, I constructed my first lean-to greenhouse. So this one is actually on the south side of my grandparents' property, and it is actually made with 8mm polycarbonate and then redwood that I put a marine varnish on it. This one has been up and running for about 17 years now. So it is my oldest actual greenhouse, and it has held up amazingly well. I'll do a quick walk around the outside. For a few years, I actually put in some bubble wrap, and that acted as extra insulation in the winter, because Colorado winters can be awfully harsh. So this is on the south side of the greenhouse. When I first built it, I only had a 40% shade cloth on 2/3 of the greenhouse. So it went to right here because I would grow my Sarracenia and fly traps on this side, and nepenthes and stuff that doesn't like quite as much sun on this side. So it's actually partially buried as you go up this hillside. So here I used cinder blocks, and that keeps it very well insulated even in the winter, because the cinder blocks are about 4 feet tall on this side. So this would be the southeastern side of the greenhouse. And on this side I have a swamp cooler. So that is actually on a thermostat. So once it gets over 85 degrees in this greenhouse, this swamp cooler kicks on, pulls this nice cool wet air from this side of the greenhouse in, and then if you saw the exhaust fan on the other side of the greenhouse, the very tip top of that side, it pulls it out. So I've actually had this swamp cooler that whole time, and it still works perfectly fine. Usually every 2 years I replace the pads, and that seems to work out about right. And then now I have a 60% green shade cloth across the entire top of it, because this has mostly intermediate Nepenthes and Nepenthes seedlings in here. So it's not a greenhouse I'm super proud of what I'm growing in it right now. Most of the things are relatively small, so I don't do much on Instagram or Facebook in here. So you will get one of the first video tours maybe I've ever done. So I'll talk about some of the things that I really like and don't like about this greenhouse. Being about 13 to 15 years old when I was designing it, I have learned a lot since then. So at that time I had this brilliant idea. I would use glass counters, and then I would be able to grow 2 layers of plants, which in theory that seemed like a great idea. But once you put an entire tray of plants on top, it doesn't matter if it's glass or if it's, I don't know, polycarbonate or wood, because the plants are so thick, it wouldn't matter what it is. And then the glass doesn't drain as nicely. So truthfully, I would probably never use glass again, but I got this glass for free, and so it has held up really well over the years, and it hasn't really been worth changing on this side. And excuse me, guys. Also, the other thing I changed, when I first built this greenhouse, I laid really nice brick all across the bottom here. It did look super, super nice. I love the look of it. But because water did not drain as well through the brick, it ended up getting quite muddy. And even though I had some like nice ground cover growing in between the bricks, it's not something I would recommend for me. The greenhouse needs to be relatively wet to grow Nepenthes, and it would just get really slick and kind of nasty. So a few years ago, I switched it over to this smallish pea gravel, and that has actually worked really well. It makes it relatively easy to weed, and the pea gravel will add some extra humidity to the air, especially if you spray it down in the morning. Here is actually a little pond that I dug into the ground when I first built this greenhouse. Right now, the only carnivorous plant I have in it is Utricularia gibba, but every once in a while I'll put some Aldrovandra in here, and it is actually relatively deep, so I've thought about converting it over to grow Darlingtonia, because that's actually what I've done in a different greenhouse that I will show you a little later in my tour. I completely stuccoed the whole side of this, and that has held up really well. Have enjoyed that. I can spray that down, and I would love if this Hoya will actually grow a little bit more onto the stucco and kind of cover this and give me a nice green wall. But when I cleaned it up a few years ago, it didn't really like it, and I pulled some of it off, but we'll see how it looks in a few years. I also have a misting system in this greenhouse, which right now is set to on a timer, and it goes off twice a day. So I'll kind of show you what it looks like. Just flip this switch this way. This comes on, it gives everything a nice mist. I would say it waters every plant in here just enough, so I don't even have to come in here to water, I would say 90% of the days. I have these nozzles right here. I believe they're 2 gallons per hour, so it's not a ton, and it does create this really nice fine mist that when the swamp cooler is on, it just covers the whole greenhouse, and it just feels amazing. So like right now it is, I think 91 degrees outside in Colorado, and really, really nice and relatively cool, probably around 80 in the greenhouse. So we'll just get that turned off. The swamp cooler in the winter, I will cover with this little cloth here, and that keeps the wind out and keeps it from just being open to all the elements outside. For heating this greenhouse, I have a combination of water baseboards, so it's actually hooked up to the same baseboard that heats the main house. This, I have found, it doesn't quite provide enough heating for this greenhouse to keep it above 50 degrees when it gets down to about -4, -5 outside. So then I have a backup, just space heater. So this one will only have to come on certain days when it gets super, super cold. But I try and never let this greenhouse fall below about 55 degrees. The redwood has held up relatively well. I use this nice marine varnish on it. There are a few boards that I will probably have to swap out here in the next year or two. The polycarbonate is still the original, so even after 15 years, it looks actually amazing. I think especially because the 60% shade cloth has been on it for so long, that definitely helps the polycarbonate last a little bit longer. And it is the slightly thicker, I believe it's 8mm polycarbonate, so that adds a little more insulation, especially on the cold nights. For electrical, this is on its own breaker. Just one breaker I find is enough, although it can only run one space heater because that's 1,500 watts. But everything else, it has no trouble. The exhaust fan is up here, right in this high corner. I have just some shop lights in here. These help if I want to work in here at night, especially in the winter. I have a couple outlets that are underneath in a completely enclosed outdoor style fixture here, so they seem to work pretty good. They're all on GFCI protected outlets, so just in case something were to trip, it would not give me too much grief. I did have all these terrariums set up, was growing seedlings and stuff in there, but they ended up being more trouble than they're worth, so actually I just need to clean those out and see if anyone wants some used terrariums. When I first built this greenhouse, I put in this really cool stainless steel sink just to kind of wash up afterwards, but truthfully, it was not worth it. I would have much rather had more room to grow all these plants than to have room to just wash my hands. I would much rather just use this little hose here, swap that, you turn it on, and good to go. That is one thing that it seems like a lot of people don't realize. When you're building a greenhouse, it is almost like you're building a small house. You have to have water, you have to have heat, you have to have electricity, you have to have cooling, usually lights, exhaust fans. Being in Colorado, we can get those extremely hot days, so up to about 100 degrees, where in a greenhouse, it would be literally 120, 130 degrees in no time, and that will be too hot for almost any carnivorous plant. And then during the winter, the coldest I've ever recorded since I've had this greenhouse up and running is -20 degrees. So we just have the wide range of everything. What helps me for highland plants is it cools down to almost 60 degrees every night of the year, even in the middle of July and August. So that is about 12 minutes on this greenhouse. I'm gonna move on to the second greenhouse I ever built, unless I think of something else to say real quick. but this greenhouse I could not have built without my dad and brother's help. And oh, this is the really cool thing. This giant window here, this was my room as a kid. So I could literally just climb out of my room and I would be in my paradise in my greenhouse. And so now this room I use to ship out a whole lot of plants, but no longer live in that room. But as you can imagine, it was just a little heaven on earth for me. Other than that, so here's the temperature sensors, so making sure that it's about the right temperature. That's slightly, it's about chest high, so a little above these seedlings here, and that seems to work out pretty well. When I first built this greenhouse, to talk my parents into building me a greenhouse, I had to say I would grow some vegetables for them. So the first year I planted tomatoes and radishes and a whole bunch of vegetables underneath, thinking that I would get a whole lot of wonderful vegetables for the family. And then truthfully, none of them turned out all that well because they don't get near enough light underneath. And they actually had a terrible whitefly problem. For some reason, the tomatoes and the whiteflies were crazy together. So then after that, I've never grown vegetables again in this greenhouse, and said I'd sell a few plants and we'll go out and buy some vegetables. Okay, well, let's walk around here. I'll have a quick cut here so each video isn't too long to upload or edit. But let's go out. We can look around. I think I kind of showed you all this, how that this corner of the greenhouse is basically level with the soil. Then this one goes up, so then it's about a 4-foot incline here. I'll just walk up a little bit to the side and kind of show you the overview. So that is about what this one looks like. I'll be taking some questions after, so let me know if you have any questions about greenhouse number 1. Okay, on to the next one.
There were a couple questions posted in the chat. I don't know if you could see those, Jeremiah, but I'll read them out. So there's one question about the misting system, if that's enough water for the soil or the substrate. I'm assuming you're not using very much soil. And if you have any issues with the leaves staying too wet with the frequency of misting, address that. Oh, you know what? I got to make you a co-host so you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Testing. I think I'm unmuted.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, that mist comes on twice a day for 10 minutes each time. So it is enough to completely dry everything out in between. I think right now it comes on at 6 in the morning and 6 at night. And that is completely enough to water all of those plants. Like, truthfully, I don't even have to go in there to water at all. It's just to check, make sure that everything is still running properly. I sometimes will give it a little extra water, but it's not really necessary.
Cool. There was a question on cost of material. I mean, that was probably more than a couple years ago when you were a little kid. But
yes,
do you have a rough idea of how much that first greenhouse cost you?
That one, it wasn't that much, because literally I designed it myself. I bought a greenhouse design book from Home Depot. And so it was, I got all the timbers from Home Depot, and it seems like timber has gone up a ton in price. But I think total cost for that whole greenhouse was just under $2,000. And that includes like literally everything. But myself, my brother, and dad did all the work. So that includes, I did my own electrical, I did my own plumbing, taking the baseboard heater from the main heater in the house. So, but total cost to me was, I think, just under $2,000.
Did you pay out of that pocket, or your parents pay for that?
That my grandma paid for it. That was my birthday, Christmas, I think 2 years in a row, and was able to convince her that it would add some value to the house at the time. And she did actually pay for that one for me.
So you tricked them into thinking that you were going to grow vegetables.
I was like, yeah, I will grow you tons of vegetables. We'll have these beautiful tomatoes and radish and all that. But it didn't really turn out.
Cool, cool.
Can your grandma adopt me, Jeremiah?
Yes, exactly.
There was a question about your water source.
Yes. So I will discuss that in a later video, but just as a quick heads up, I just use tap water for everything. I run between 35 and 50 parts per million, given the time of the year and the time of the day.
And we have at least one person from Costa Rica, and I believe they've joined us before on a previous Zoom meeting. But they were asking about the misting systems they sell on Amazon. They weren't more specific than that, but I'm gonna guess that they're referring to those that you just connect to a garden hose. Do you have any experience with those versus the PVC
No,
setup?
so I have the same PVC setup in all three of my greenhouses, and truthfully, it works amazing. Every once in a while, like one of the heads will need replaced. It'll get a little clogged, but it's just super easy. You just unscrew one, screw a new one back in, and you're good to go. I've seen some of the cheaper ones, but like this one is really inexpensive to set up because it's just PVC and a solenoid. And then you can put it on a timer, you can put it on a humidistat, you can put it on a, I don't know, repeat cycle timer. It's just a little more work probably to set up. And maybe if I were to build another huge greenhouse, I would invest in one of those high pressure misting systems, but they're probably 10 times as expensive would be my guess. And yes, the shade cloth I use is 60%. The first time it was 40%, and I find that was just not quite enough for Nepenthes.
There was a question about your stucco walls and if moss and other epiphytes grow well on the stucco walls or your cinder block.
Yeah, so far, not a whole lot. Like that one Hoya is kind of the only thing I've let grow partially on the walls. They don't have like mist directly onto the walls, so they're not probably wet enough for a whole lot of moss. But it would be kind of cool to kind of get something set up with maybe some like chicken wire and maybe grow some like pings or something like that, and then just come in once a week and just kind of spray it down. Maybe that'll be a project if COVID lasts much longer.
Cool. I'm scrolling through the chat. It looks like we probably covered most of it. Do you, by chance, test your tap water? Leo was asking about a little bit more specific water
Yeah.
quality
So,
questions.
just with a ppm meter of dissolved solids. So I don't do any more accurate tests. Like I know Colorado Springs does not add fluoride to their water, and it does come out literally between 35 and 50 parts per million. And I do find it varies a little bit from summer to winter, but I'm still able to use tap water for everything I grow.
And then there was a question about if you use the hydrofogger in combination with a small air conditioning unit, if you think the dehumidification from the AC would affect the humidity, or if the fogger would be able to keep the humidity up. Are you running AC or are you doing a swamp cooler?
AC would be way too expensive for me. You use so much electricity in a greenhouse, even of that size. So almost anywhere, I would say fans would be better bet. Now, if you're somewhere that is super, super humid, I've heard of people using AC, and you just have to be realizing it is going to cost a lot of money. I wouldn't be too concerned about the dehumidifying aspect of it as I would be the cost of it.
Cool. And then there was a question about air volume. Do you know approximately how much air volume you're moving?
Yes. Man, I should know in cubic feet per minute, and I want to say it's 1,500 if I would guess. So it's a pretty good airflow. Whenever I was doing calculations, it's about 3 times as much as I would use for a room of that size, because it was pretty easy to find swamp coolers rated for like 1,000 square foot room. And so I would just go about 3 times as much as was required for that. So that was actually one of the smaller swamp coolers at that time.
Cool. We'll just do one more question so we can get moving, but there was a question about the difference between a swamp cooler and a hydro fogger. don't know if you want to just answer that real quick.
So a hydrofogger is actually just adding humidity to the air, but it's not necessarily bringing in air from outside the greenhouse. So it will cool it somewhat, but to actually get evaporative cooling, you must bring in outside air that is not as humid, and then therefore adding the humidity to the air will bring down the dew point. So the less humidity there is in the air, the more humidity you can add to the air, therefore the more you can cool the air coming in. I don't know if that quite makes sense, but a hydrofogger, as far as I know, is basically a big humidifier.
Right. Cool. All right. Let's get going on to greenhouse number 2. Just so everybody's
Perfect.
aware, there are a total of 3 greenhouses. So we've still got a number of videos to get through. So let's move on to the next one.
It looks like we are already on to greenhouse number 2. So the first greenhouse I built when I was about 15 to 16 years old. This one was closer to when I was 17 and 18. So this is a Ryon Kit Greenhouse. This one originally believe was manufactured in Israel, and it has held up relatively well. It was a relatively inexpensive route. It is 16 feet long and 8 feet wide, and my guess is about 7.5 feet tall. I definitely wish it was a little bit taller, especially for Sarracenia. Because these side walls are relatively short, if I have Sarracenia growing too close to the sides, they will hit the top and then get a little funky looking. So when I first built this greenhouse, I had half of it to grow tropical stuff like my Nepenthes, my Helianthera, and then this side was all to grow Sarracenia, flytraps, and Drosophilum. As you can see, this polycarbonate has not held up as well. We had some really bad hail about 2 years ago, and you can see it has been damaged. This is, I believe, 6 millimeter polycarbonate. So definitely not as strong and doesn't insulate near as well as the 8 millimeter variety. If I were to do it again, I would make sure the greenhouse I bought would use 8 millimeter because it seems to hold up so much better and it does insulate a whole lot better. Now that I have this one as a temperate greenhouse, so all my fly traps and Sarracenia are in here, the insulation isn't as big of a deal, but if you're gonna grow anything tropical, it makes a huge difference. So again, I use swamp coolers to cool all my greenhouses. This one is no different. This is actually a relatively new swamp cooler. I had problems with a swamp cooler after about 10 years in this greenhouse. And so this one I got just a little while ago. I do let this greenhouse get a little bit hotter, so it will max out at around 90 to 95 degrees. As you can see, like the tops of it, you see a little bit of hail damage, but for a little over, okay, so I built this when I was 18, so about 15 years old. It's actually, I can't complain. Most polycarbonate is only rated for a 16 or 15 year life. And I mean, it's about at the end of its life, but it's not been bad at all. And for the price, this one has been amazing because the first greenhouse I built was all custom. I actually designed it myself on graph paper. And this one I just ordered from the internet. It showed up in about 12 boxes. I put down this pressure treated 4x4 lumber, and then each corner I have a concrete pillar that keeps it in place. And overall, it has actually done really, really well. We will go inside of it now. Here's the door. So this is the only part I've had to replace once already, is where this door handle is. Probably not necessarily the greenhouse's fault. I left it open a couple times and the wind would catch it and bang it back and forth. And that seems to do a little bit of damage. So now I have a couple bricks there so I can prop it up against it so it doesn't swing at all. One of the things I learned from the other greenhouse is an exhaust fan is not all that necessary. The negative air pressure from the swamp cooler will just press the air out of this louvered vent. So it does not have a fan on it, and I don't really find the fan super necessary, but depending on what you want to grow, it might help a little bit. So then as we go in here, you can see I learned and I switched over to different benches. These are actually made out of redwood, and then has this, it's called hardware cloth. I believe this is 1/2-inch hardware cloth. I have changed some things in here because, like I said, when I first built this, all my Nepenthes and tropical stuff were down at this side, where now I have this liquid, the water, all around the benches. So I used PVC pipe and then filled it up with, I believe it's 6 mil like greenhouse polyfilm. And that was actually one of Robert Coe's suggestions, and I love it because you can just put water in at this one end. It will kind of flow all the way down, and then as soon as water starts leaking out of the other, I know, okay, they have enough water. During the summer, I would say I have to water every 2 to 3 days in this greenhouse during active growing season. And then during the winter, I water maybe once a week, just because they're not using near as much. I have all my Sarracenia on that side, and then this side is kind of my collectors or cultivar fly traps. This side gets quite a bit of morning sun, but I think they could use just a little bit more. I think the polycarbonate has degraded a little bit, so it doesn't let in quite enough light. Right now I actually have a GoPro hooked up to time lapse. Oh, there, it just took a photo. So I believe right now it's taking 1 photo every 15 minutes. So we'll kind of see how that goes. I tried a different time lapse here this spring. It had some failures, so it didn't turn out. So we're trying again. I think I've had it up and running for about 2 weeks now. I would love to go for about a month, and then we'll see how it turns out. And then we might do a Nepenthes or something like that. Have a good friend, Chris. He kind of helped me get these time lapses set up, so we'll see how that goes. As far as heating this greenhouse goes, I just use 1 space heater, also on a thermostat. So I keep it at this side of the greenhouse. I let this greenhouse get well below freezing in the winter, so it'll get to be about, maybe 15 degrees in here at its coldest. If it's gonna be a night that gets that cold, I turn off the water from the house, and so then it won't freeze the pipes. But usually I would say it drops down to about, 28, 29 degrees in the winter, and then that's not enough to really do a whole lot of damage so far. This spring I got these new, they're just the cheapest LED shop lights I could find at Amazon. And all my extra fly traps I had growing underneath this west side of the greenhouse. And I found the shop lights were pretty adequate. They were about 6 to 12 inches away from the fly traps, and it worked out relatively well. When I first built this greenhouse, because I had Nepenthes in here, I again had a misting system across 2/3 of it. So as you can see right here, all the way around, over to here, and over to this side, and all the way to right here. Because Sarracenia and flytraps do not need or like that extra water on their leaves, I have it completely turned off now, and actually I cut the pipe, so if I ever change this back into a tropical greenhouse, I will just have to replace this solenoid right here. And then as you can see, there's where it goes up through this new table here. So I would just have to swap that out, and then I would be good to have a misting system up and running again. Here's where it hooks up to the swamp cooler, and it goes from this pipe outside. I just unhook that every winter and re-hook it up during the summer, because even in the middle of winter, the greenhouse can still heat up quite a bit, especially if it's sunny out. So I still have to have a swamp cooler available to use, but it just acts as a fan, and it brings in cold air from the outside, where this time of year it uses the evaporative cooling, so it mixes water in with the air to really help cool the greenhouse. Swamp coolers by far work best in arid conditions. So somewhere dry like Arizona, Southern California, where our humidity is literally in the single digits most summer days, the greenhouse has no trouble keeping relatively cool with a nice swamp cooler. Then, addition to that swamp cooler, I use one circulation fan. This one runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Right now, I just have it on its medium speed, and it just kind of blows the hot air across the top of these fly traps so they don't get too hot and down and out the other side of the greenhouse. A few things that I don't like about this greenhouse, again, is how low it is. So like when I'm walking in here, let's see if I can show you. I'm a solid like 6'2", 6'3", and my hair, if I'm stepping, will graze right across the top of all these lights, and then these wires that help keep everything tight. It's just a little low. So if I were to do it again, I could use this exact same greenhouse. I would just build it up onto a little platform and give it an extra, probably 2 feet of height, and it would be just perfect. Because then it would also help with the Sarracenia so that they don't hit the sides of the wall here, and they could get to their full height, especially the ones that are back in this corner, because they do something like this. They hit the top and then they look a little funky, and that obviously nobody likes. The other thing, I don't know. I mean, for a temperate greenhouse, this has been absolutely amazing because for the price, it was super hard to beat. I wouldn't obviously do a misting system again if I was building a temperate greenhouse. I have no shade cloth on it because the temperate plants, even in Colorado, love as much sun as they can possibly get. And then the 6mm polycarbonate is just a little bit thin, and if they made one that used 8mm, I would definitely go with that. Other than that, I would make sure I would probably do a little bit bigger footers. So let's go out and around this side. So like I said, this 4x4 pressure treated lumber, it's held up actually really well, but because Colorado and Colorado Springs is so hilly, my footer was not enough. I would probably have done these about 3 or 4 times as deep and made sure that anything that was gonna wash away from all the rain coming down this hillside wouldn't actually be a problem. Where right there, I don't know, it just looks a little funny. These railroad ties have actually worked out really good. That gives it a nice, just extra step into the greenhouse. But maybe I would have used railroad ties to help build it up so the greenhouse would have been a little bit taller this way. This greenhouse is on its own breaker as well, so I can use roughly one 1,500 watt electric heater. So coming down into here, and then you can see it also has lights that go across the top. Those lights are not obviously for growing anything, just so I can come in here when I have to repot everything in like January and February. I can see and work late into the night. The benches have actually been really good. I can tell I learned quite a bit from that first batch. These, I don't know if I would really change anything with the benches. For Sarracenia though, you don't need this hardware cloth, so I would probably just use plywood or like something just a little bit straighter, a little bit more even across the top, where the hardware cloth worked great for Nepenthes and Helianthera because they can sit on the top of it and everything just drains so nicely. So I think that's about it for this one. This one was a much easier build because it was a kit greenhouse, but don't let a kit greenhouse scare you away. Even a relatively inexpensive one, I've had almost no problems with the kit itself. And to have a greenhouse up and running, I think this one would have been only around $3,000 total, maybe slightly more than that. But I did all my own electrical work, and literally did everything myself with just my family's help. So that's able to keep it a little bit less expensive. If you see anything you really want to know about this greenhouse, remember it is greenhouse number 2, and let me know. We will head on to the biggest and my favorite greenhouse, greenhouse number 3. Okay, over and out, guys.
Let's see, there was quite a few questions, but I think, Jeremiah, you've covered some of it. Maybe you'll take some of the time to go ahead and expand on some of the answers. You know, there was a question about, or you talked about LED lights, super cheap shop lights. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about what type of additional lighting people should be using. Is there some sort of temperature we should be looking for? What are they looking for when they go shop for LED lights?
Yeah, so I mean, that is a great question, and it seems like LED lights are improving faster than almost anyone can really keep up with them. But those were actually just some of the cheapest shop lights I could find on Amazon that were LEDs. They're not meant for growing plants. They're literally meant for just in a garage. But I've never, that's what I've used before when I was using T8s. They were just literally what I could find at Home Depot. I would never use the grow light bulbs. Those, if they're close enough to the plants, I was getting amazing color on the Venus flytraps. As I've sold fly traps and made more room in the other greenhouse, I've moved them up onto the top, so then I don't have to pay to light them when I just have the sun out. But yeah, they've worked out great. In the other greenhouse, you'll see I have quite a few different lights that I played around with, and I do talk quite a bit more about that in the next video. And so once we get done with that, if you guys still have questions, we'll come back to it.
Awesome. There was a question about the wattage on the space heater at the greenhouse.
Yeah, so it's 1,500 watts, which as far as I know is like the biggest space heaters you can get that will run on a normal, I believe it's a 15 amp breaker. And so you can just like convert how many amps you're able to use depending on how big of a breaker you are using. If I tried to plug in 2 of those same size space heaters into any one of those outlets, it will trip my main breaker. And that was a problem when I was keeping tropical plants in there. I would have to run an extension cord out from my room through the other greenhouse and up, because it would take 2 space heaters on like the coldest of nights to make sure it didn't drop below about 40 degrees for the Nepenthes and Helianthera. But now with the Sarracenia, it never needs more than 1 in that greenhouse.
Excellent. Okay, so you have any suggestions about cooling in a hot, humid area?
Man, that is a really good question. And I would honestly go to like a local nursery that is able to sell tropical plants and see how they are able to do it. Because I know there are some places when it's like 90% humidity and 95 degrees outside, a humidifier is not going to do literally anything. So then the best you can do is just have fans, and then those would only be able to get it as cool as it is outside. So for Sarracenia and fly traps, that's probably, it's not a problem, but if you're trying to grow Highland Nepenthes, like truthfully, I think in the next few years, indoor grow chambers are really going to be the way to grow anywhere kind of the deep south, because LED lights will be relatively inexpensive and it'll be much cheaper to light something than it would be to cool something. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out.
Oh, I think I'm going to have to build one of those myself then.
Yeah.
I don't have a chamber, and I really need to get one. So
Yeah.
let's see. Earlier you mentioned that your water was between 35 and 50 ppm. So
Yep.
do you find it necessarily do you have to occasionally flush out your plants with distilled water?
So I really don't. So like the benches there, it will get up to almost 100 ppm during part of the year. Usually I would say it's closer to 80. And if I ever see that it's slightly over 100, I'll just run a little more water through there and just flush out that whole tray. Have I done it even once this summer? Not yet. So maybe I will in the next couple weeks. I should probably take a reading, but it seems like as long as it's under about 100 for most carnivorous plants, I haven't seen any problem with it.
Wow, really? You feel like the fly traps are okay like that too?
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, they haven't minded my tap water really at all. The only thing is, like I said, I thought they could use just a touch more light. The polycarbonate isn't quite as clear as it used to be, and so I don't think they have quite the red color that I would like. But as the temperatures cool down in September and October, they do get more red color for me.
Right. I'm happy to hear that your fly traps are doing fine even when it reaches 100 ppm. I can't do that. Let's see.
Yeah.
How do you split greenhouse between tropical and temperate plants? Did it require a divider?
That's a really good question. So no, I didn't use any sort of divider, and it was kind of like using the best of what I could do for both. Like it would never get down cold enough for the temperate plants to go into a complete dormancy, but because it would get down to 55 degrees and a whole lot less sun in the winter, they would go dormant. But I wouldn't put up any sort of divider. The only difference was I had shade cloth on that side and a misting system on the side with tropical stuff.
Okay, let's see. Good questions come in. Let's see. So Christensen is asking that he has a 6x8 greenhouse. He lives in San Diego, by the way.
Cool.
And he's part of the San Diego Carnivorous Plant Society. It's raised, but he says that it's raised about 2 feet. What would you use to raise your greenhouse? Brick, lumber, something else entirely? How would you do that?
So if I were to do it again, I would for sure use cinder blocks, just because they're super easy to lay. You can get them all for relatively cheap, and they will last for years and years. So if it were me, I would just lay some cinder block. I did at the other greenhouse, and it really wasn't that difficult, and it will last pretty much forever.
All right. So I think, did we get everything? Let's see.
I think we had a couple quick new ones here.
Ones over here.
Go to the chat. Winter storms. So we have a friend from Montana, and so we do get some winter storms here in Colorado, but honestly, like I'm sure nothing quite like you get in Montana. We get hail a few times a year. I will talk about that more in the next video and show a couple Sarracenias that I had outside, and the hail will just decimate them, and they look absolutely terrible. In the winter, in the entire time I've had my greenhouses up and running, I've hit minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit once. The average winter low, the coldest that I will record is about minus 10. And then it seems like every about 10 years, I'll get a minus 20 degree night. So it is, I mean, that's getting down there. It's not quite like I'm sure what you get up in Montana, but it's not warm by any stretch of the imagination. And then those nights I never sleep super well because I'm like, oh, I hope the greenhouse will be okay. And I have a couple alarms in them just in case it's not. And then I have backup like propane heaters. They're kind of like for ice fishing. And so I could throw a 100,000 BTU ice fishing heater in the greenhouse just in case. But the other greenhouses do have, or the main greenhouse has a backup heater as well.
Okay, there's quite a few questions, and there's some non-questions. I'm just trying to read through what are questions you haven't yet answered. If you see anything, Maya, that you haven't answered or that you would like to expand on, feel free to jump in. Okay. I'm trying to see about the time and see whether we need to move on to greenhouse number 3.
Got it.
Yep. Okay, so John is saying that we're going to move on to 3, but if there's anything in the list of questions that you'd like to answer real quick, that's the last question before we go on to the next greenhouse, go ahead and do so now.
Got it. Let's see. Where's questions? I mean, I think I'm going to answer quite a few of these in the next one. Reverse osmosis systems. I do have a little bit of experience, but honestly, like the brand doesn't seem to matter. It's just like the gallons per hour. Yeah, it seems like okay. Somebody's saying it's 93 degrees outside and 87 in the greenhouse. That seems just perfect, especially for fly traps and Sarracenia. But yeah, I think move on to the next one. I'll kind of answer a couple questions as I see them. And then once we get through the next one, I can just answer questions until we run out of time or you have something else you need to do.
All right, John, you ready for the next video?
Okay, guys, now we are on to greenhouse number 3. So this greenhouse, I believe I finished off in around 2008. And anyone who's ever come for a visit knows coming down this hillside right into the greenhouse is just one of the most amazing feelings ever. So this greenhouse is 20 feet wide by 50 feet long, so just at 1,000 square feet. Honestly, I thought, oh, it's a 1,000 square foot greenhouse. That will be way bigger than I will ever use for in my entire life times about 10. As anyone who grows plants knows, that is definitely not true. I think I could fill a greenhouse 10 times this size in about a year and a half at this rate, but I have to be a little more careful. One thing that I wanted to show you just before we go in, I get some questions, hey Jeremiah, why don't you just grow your Sarracenia outside? Some people don't realize that Colorado is definitely not an easy spot to grow most plants. So these two Sarracenia I've had outside since the last frost. They were actually looking somewhat okay, but then in Colorado we get hail. And holy cow, this hail just absolutely decimated this Leucophila. It was not a bad looking plant until this hail hit, but if you get something like that, this plant will hopefully produce a few more pitchers. But if you've been working really hard and then you get something like that that will just come through and rip your plants to pieces, it can just be disheartening. Now, that doesn't mean a lot of places in the country you can grow, especially Sarracenia and fly traps outside, and even in Colorado, I do every year. This year I only have those 2 plants, but a lot of years I'll fill up small kiddie swimming pools, and they survive. They just do not look wonderful. And if you just want plants that will survive and not look wonderful, hey, by all means, you can grow them like that, and there's nothing wrong with it. But with a little extra help, and definitely in Colorado having a greenhouse, it is almost a necessity. So we will start here. This greenhouse is all on its own utilities. So I have the natural gas coming in right here, and that is actually to heat the greenhouse, because during the winter, I try and never let this greenhouse get below 55 degrees. That seems to be just enough to send the Sarracenia into dormancy and not too low for most Nepenthes. The benches on this one, I actually welded all myself. Honestly, I probably wouldn't do it exactly like this again. It was relatively inexpensive. This is just expanded metal, and then this is fence post, like for a chainless chain link fence. I cut it all, welded it, but they sag. So if I were to do it again, I would definitely put a few more braces in between, where this like whole 6 or 7 foot span is just a little too much for the expanded metal to keep a nice rigid shape. Also, these are extra pots down here. Every greenhouse probably has a few extra. I still need to get this cleaned up, but didn't quite have time. All of the Sarracenia side of things, I have gone over to these large trays. These have worked really well. I do drill holes in them, like right here. So then I only get about a 1-inch water right in this corner here, which will mean sometimes 2 or 3 inches in the very center of it because of that sagging. I am spoiled. In Colorado, I'm able to use tap water for all my carnivorous plants at all times, but I do run a backup. This is a 300-gallon reservoir here, and just in case something were to happen, I swap on over to these RO units, and I have a booster pump, so then I could switch over and use all RO water on the plants, and then this is enough water to water the greenhouses for about a week. So if water were to go out for a little while, at least I would have enough. A lot of people ask me why I don't just collect rainwater for the plants. And that is a very good question, but for years, Colorado had a stupid law that made it illegal to catch and store rainwater. Luckily, they have since made that law obsolete, and you now are allowed to do it, but that was not at all possible when I was building this greenhouse, or I would have loved to put a large water tank in. It's definitely something I may look into in the future, because it would be worthwhile, because water is one of the more expensive utilities in Colorado because we are so dry. So this greenhouse is actually 14 feet tall in the center, so I have plenty of room to play around with. I never will bump my head on anything, and it has, because it has that much air above, it keeps down here super nice and cool, and it is just wonderful. The taller you can go in a greenhouse, I would say the better, and especially if you're gonna grow some really tall vining nepenthes, they absolutely love it. So for water in this greenhouse, again, it is just hooked up to tap water, city water, but I have all of this here. So on the top of the greenhouse, I have sprinkler systems. So just in case a fire was to come by, I can just swap this on and then run away, because we do have some fires in Colorado. They were definitely a lot worse about 7 or 8 years ago, so I've never actually had to use it, but it is kind of just in case I do have that. Then this is a misting system. So right here, I'm able to turn it on manually just in case like power were to go out. I could just drench the greenhouse with a nice mist the whole time, but then I also have it connected to a solenoid valve. So then the solenoid valve is hooked up to a timer. So then that comes on for a couple times a day. During the winter, it comes on less, and during the summer, it comes on more. Then this is the PVC pipe that takes it on over. Again, no misting on the Sarracenia side of things. They definitely don't appreciate it, but the nepenthes, they love it. On top of the greenhouse is a 60% aluminate shade cloth. That shade cloth is relatively new. I think it's about 3 years old now. I had one that lasted 10 years, but it was starting to get a little old, so I just swapped it out with a brand new one, especially to let in a little more light in the winter. During the summer, though, the light in here is quite intense, and as you can see, I get relatively good color on all my Sarracenia. Excuse me there. And then over my lowland chamber, I actually have another smaller 40% shade cloth. Then as we go around, this greenhouse was also a kit greenhouse from a company called Farm Tech, or it has another name, Greenhouse Supply, I believe it is. It was originally called the Majestic Greenhouse, and I don't believe they sell this exact model anymore, but I have been super happy with it. I did have to get it stamped by an engineer, because if you build it within city limits, you will definitely have to get it stamped and make sure it meets all building codes depending on where you are. If you're out in the country, it seems like it's a little more easygoing. Nobody really cares what you can do, but it'll just depend on your location. As far as this greenhouse goes, I felt like I learned a lot from each and every greenhouse I built previously, and so I was kind of able to take most of my knowledge and then bring it in and kind of use it in this greenhouse. This greenhouse has one main Modine heater. I believe this is 150,000 BTU, so that should be able to keep this greenhouse at 55 degrees even if it was minus 20 degrees outside. And then just in case power was to go out, I do have a backup generator, but then I also have this heater, and this one doesn't require any electricity to run, so it is just a backup heater. It actually is a lot less efficient and uses a lot more gas, but just in case, hopefully that would be enough to keep this greenhouse completely above freezing, even on the absolute coldest of nights. We also have this area right here, I try and always keep at least a little clean, because this is where I work on repotting different plants and actually shipping out plants. So it's not all that big. It's probably about a 3 foot by 3 foot square, but I find that any extra space in this greenhouse is hard to come by. So even that little amount is all I really need. Then also I keep almost all my soils inside of these trash cans. So this is filled with what's in here. So this is already mixed up. It looks like it's sand, perlite, and peat. And most of the containers I have with all my basic ingredients, so that then I will pull them out and mix it. So like in here is the sphagnum moss I use. In another one is the perlite and peat moss. And so then I just am able to mix those up when needed. I couldn't decide how to lay out my benches. So actually a friend of mine, Bob Hannaran, when I was in Australia, I think it was in 2008, he was the one that kind of convinced me on going with this one larger path down the center and then smaller paths that go down each side. And I do love that. If I could do roller benches, that is probably what I would do, because that is actually the most efficient. But I think this would be the second most efficient. I have seen a couple greenhouses that they bring the plants a little bit more away from the sides, and I can definitely see the advantages to that as well. But if I were to do it again, it would probably be about the same thing. It's really nice for giving tours because this width is about 4 feet in the center here, so you can have quite a few people down, and then you go down each one of these sides, which is just closer to like 2 or 3 feet, depending on how much is sticking out over it. As we head down to this side, this is now the tropical side of things, so it has all the nepenthes and Teleamphora and good stuff like that. Over the last few years, I converted underneath some of my benches. So this has actually T5 lights, and this just gives me a little bit more growing room. I still have quite a few that I'll be able to convert here as soon as I need more room. So it looks like another 4 or 5 down this way. And then I'm super excited about this one, because these, I got those brand new grow lights that are from Carnivorous. And they're flow wave, I believe. I've had these up and running for about 2 weeks now, and so far I'm super impressed with them. They're definitely so much cooler than the T5 lights. For my next ones, I'll probably use those super cheap LED shop lights just because I have them, and then I'll slowly convert to more of the really nice LED grow lights as I want to spend the money, because obviously they're not super cheap. This is actually the north side of the greenhouse here, so it gets slightly less sun. And as you can see, the sun just went behind a cloud, and I have these LED grow lights. These are GE. They're also waterproof, I believe IP65. I've had these for about 2 years now, and so far I've been super happy with them. I have them on the north side, so it looks like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So 12 of these light strips. They run quite a bit more in the winter, and then during the summer, where we get quite a bit of light, I just don't need quite as much of them. They are, I think, hooked up on 2 separate breakers, because you are only supposed to hook up so many on each breaker. For a while, I had some really large high pressure sodium. Let's see, up here. So I didn't actually run these last year because the LEDs are so much cheaper to run and so much more efficient, but I ended up getting these for free, so I thought I'd install a couple of them anyway. I probably won't run them again just because the LEDs will save me a lot of money in the long run. In this greenhouse, I actually have 2 separate, very large swamp coolers. And each one of these is on a separate breaker and on a separate thermostat. So just in case one were to have any problems and go out, hopefully the second one wouldn't. Either one of these would be enough to keep the greenhouse safe at a safe temperature, even on the hottest of days in the summer. And then last year, I just hooked up these hydro foggers. So whenever either one of these swamp coolers comes on, it automatically turns on these hydro foggers. And so far I've been pretty darn happy with them. They definitely, in the winter, because these swamp coolers are not adding humidity to the air, the hydro foggers do. And so especially for some of these really highland Nepenthes, they seem to love it. I do actually think that this humidifier that I have way up here, so this is a Japanese made humidifier, actually throws out a lot more humidity. So I will just turn it on right now. So right now it is on a humidistat. So anytime the humidity drops below, I believe it's 75%, it turns this guy on. And as you can see, I mean, that's quite a bit more humidity. And so if I could have bought another one of those or two, I probably would have, but I couldn't find them anywhere. So if anyone knows where to find one more of these guys, I would probably be very, very interested. Also, this swamp cooler and humidifier combo, this one turns on at 80 degrees, and this one right here turns on at 78 degrees. So pretty much it never gets above 80 degrees in this greenhouse all summer long. So the highland plants do really seem to enjoy it. Honestly, I'm always kind of messing with things and getting them to do a little bit better, because if we're not still learning, I feel like we're not improving, and I feel like I could always improve. We will go over to this side now, and I'll explain a little bit about how I have my fertilization set up. So this is actually a fertilizer injector right here. So I can basically swap each one of these. So I turn this one on, this one off, this one on, and then I stick this little nozzle here into this little bucket, which I have my pre-mixed, it's maxi fertilizer all mixed up and ready to go. And then this dilutes it at the exact amount that it's supposed to. Over the years I have changed. Like for years and years I never fertilized any of my plants. Now with this maxi, I was doing it twice a month, and now I've cut back to once a month. I think the Helianthera would like it a little more often. These all have been recently repotted, so I would say they don't look their absolute best right now, but they're all kind of coming back. I'm getting a lot of like new buds on them, and they'll look especially amazing come about September through December. On this side, I actually just swapped out. I used to use screening over the top of all my benches, because this expanded metal has large enough openings that my pitchers will actually develop underneath the benches. And so then when I pick up something to look at it, there are always some pitchers hanging below. And that's not always the best thing to have happen. Like, as you can see right there, it's kind of developing just in between. And so I was having Okay guys, we had just a little glitch there, so I'm back. So on this side again, I have some T5 lights over these freshly repotted Helianthera. So far so good. These were repotted about a month and a half ago. I have a really nice Darlingtonia over there. It's on the bottom southeast side of the greenhouse. And the new traps are relatively green, and then last year's actually still have some nice color, even though they're not getting really any direct sunlight, but a little from these T5s and a little from this area. I keep these insect traps, one about every 6 to 7 feet underneath, and that helps with any of the gnats, and if I see any like pest insects on it, then I'll be able to take care of them sooner rather than later. As we go up, I have a drip irrigation system for this greenhouse. So that is this solenoid right here. So I have it come on for just a few minutes a day. It goes across the bottom here and goes onto the south side because these pots dry out just a little bit quicker than everything else. Then it goes up here, and then you see this black tubing. Each one of these hanging nepenthes has a nozzle that goes right to it. So I'll plug this in and show you what it looks like when it is actually turned on. So it probably has around 200 open nozzles all on the same, same units right now. And I just run them all at once, and it doesn't really seem to be a problem. It takes about 30 seconds for the pressure to build. And then once it does, each one of these little nozzles, I believe it's a ½ gallon per hour drip. So just enough to give the hanging nepenthes a little bit of water. And in just a few seconds, I can basically water all these hanging plants. Honestly, I prefer to water by hand, but if I go on vacation or head out for a little while, that makes it so much easier on my family who takes care of them, because then I can just set it up to water for roughly a minute and a half to 3 minutes, just a couple times a day. So then as we head on down, you see that these benches here all have this new netting over the cross, the hardware net. So far I'm pretty happy with that, but it's only been there for about a month. The screening was growing too much mold and algae and who knows what else. Then over on here, I have my biggest plant in the greenhouse with this one. I think a 16 or 17 inch pitcher right now, and the whole plant is probably about 6 or 7 feet tall with a couple growing points. On this greenhouse, I have all these outlets. Again, they're all GFCI outlets, so just in case they get wet, they'll go on or off automatically, or off automatically, and then I have to turn them on. I think I have them every 10 feet, which honestly is about right. It's one of those things, it is a little more expensive, but the more outlets you have in a greenhouse, definitely the better. I wish I would have done more outlets across the top. So I have since added a couple, but these are relatively new. I wish I would have put an outlet every 7 to 10 feet down this line here where I have all my lights. It would have just been really handy instead of having to run extension cords all the way over for like the security cameras and kind of anything else I want to run. It would have just had outlets. Put in an outlet here a little while after, and that's for this fan. This fan is hooked up, so when the first stage of my swamp coolers come on, it actually turns this one on, and this one's actually moving super fast now, but because of frame rate, it looks like it's moving relatively slow. And then that blows nice fresh air across all of these. I'll point that down a little so you can see. The Arugula definitely like good airflow. And that is pretty much the inside of this greenhouse. I have outlets going down both sides. This actually is to protect some of these nepenthes, especially I find Veitchii and peltata seedlings. For me, they don't like too much water on their leaves, so these go in this special chamber here that I just put one layer of polycarbonate over the top, and then I just have to hand water all of those. So the next things I'll be doing to this greenhouse, I'll add a few more lights down each of these sides, so then I'll be able to grow in basically 3 levels. I'll have plants down there, then I'll have plants right on this main bench, and then I have the plants hanging up in the rafters. Because I have so many layers of plants, they get about the right amount of sun, even with the 60% shade cloth. Everything seems to have pretty good color in here. I don't notice anything. During the summer, they might even get a little too much sun up in the rafters, but then in the winter, just the right amount. So it seems to work out about right. For watering, I just have one main hose that I can water by hand. So I can turn this, just go like this, Again, I can just use tap water for everything, and so that makes it super easy. I can go around, just give everything a quick water. Usually I try and water once a day. Not everything needs it, but at least one or two things will, and then can kind of give everything a once over. Make sure nothing has any major pests or diseases. So now we will do a quick walk down the north side of the greenhouse. This greenhouse is facing north to south. So this is, well, I guess east to west. So this is west here. So then this long side is south side. So then it gets as much sun as possible, especially in the winter. And then back this way, where all the highland plants are, that is the north side. So it stays a little bit cooler because the sun rises on that side, which is actually east. My swamp coolers are on that side because in the afternoon, when it's a little bit hotter, the swamp coolers themselves won't be in the direct sun. And I find that is able to keep temperatures down just a little bit. So here's kind of the overview. You can see the drip system going across the top, the lighting. I just have the little light switch right here, so then I can turn it on. All these lights come on. Again, they aren't grow lights up there, just to help me so I can work during the dark in the winter mostly. Then as we walk down the side of it, we can see about how many of these screws that I use. These have a rubber washer around it so it doesn't damage the polycarbonate. I have actually had to replace the polycarbonate on the top on this side of the greenhouse because the hail we had about 2 years ago. Underneath the shade cloth was actually perfectly fine and there was no damage at all. 1 year I did remove the shade cloth in the winter, but the plants actually burned. So in Colorado, I wouldn't do that again because even in the winter, we get just crazy amounts of sun. So then looking down the whole side of it, and here we can see, here's 28 foot by 30 feet, 60% aluminate. Man, I really like this stuff. It works spectacular for me. Here are my two large swamp coolers. So I had one problem because for a few years I actually used reverse osmosis water for all of the greenhouse. And anyone who's dealt with reverse osmosis water knows how corrosive it can be. So it actually took the paint right off of these swamp cooler units. I probably only have another 2 years out of them before I'll actually have to replace them. Excuse me. This is on its own electrical, so I know exactly how much electricity I'm using. And as you can see right now, this side of the swamp cooler is turned on and running right now, where the other side is not. Electrical here comes in. This goes directly to the electrical pole right into here. And let's see, I probably have about, 10 or 12 breakers on this. So a little hard to read right now. So this one is my small fan swamp cooler, furnace, big fan swamp cooler. I have lights, south side outlets, north side outlets. I have a couple extra just in case I want to add anything at a later date. But so far it seems about right. Let's head on around. So I'd say that gives a pretty good overview of the greenhouse. I guess now I'll probably go and take questions for a little while. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the walkthroughs. I'm not sure if we'll post this online or not, or if it is just exclusively for you guys who are attending this webinar. But either way, I would love to hear your thoughts, what you would like to see maybe at a later date, what I didn't cover quite enough of. But as I said, this wasn't too much of a plant overview because I've done quite a few of those over the years. This was more just to show how I grow plants in greenhouses here in Colorado. The stuff that I have to deal with isn't necessarily the things that a normal or other places in the country would. As far as if you go back east, they may not get a whole lot of sun in the winter, where we get just as much sun in the summer as we do in the winter, just a few less hours, but very few cloudy days in the winter. And so that's why the Nepenthes will do so well even in the winter here in Colorado. And in the summer, it's hot during the day. So again, we're about 90 degrees today. But inside this greenhouse, we're at about 76, 77 on the far side. And they just love the cool nights. Well, thanks so much for everyone for attending. I will be live here with questions and answers later. Talk to you all soon. Over and out.
So I think one of the questions that didn't get answered, looks like a more complex question too, is from David Pfeffer. This is the one about the, he says, anyone who has produced RO water and pumped them to misting systems and plants, any recommendations on self-priming and submersible pumps? I've had 3 die over the span of 4 to 5 months now. I don't know if you have something to say on that.
Yes, so I used a booster pump. So it was relatively expensive. I mean, it was at least a couple $100. I forgot if it was like 400 or 500, and I believe it's like, oh, I forgot the brand name, but it's a booster pump and not a submersible pump. And that's what I found was the only thing that could really hold up to reverse osmosis water because of how corrosive it is. And I loved how it's just only turns on when you need it, and I can run all my misting system, I can run my hand hose, and I can use that 300-gallon water tank as if it was city water, because it brings it back up to almost 65 psi. And so that I installed probably 5 years ago. Just when I was playing around, I was like, maybe I'll switch over to RO water, think it would help the plants. But then after 2 years of using RO water, I didn't notice any different for me whatsoever. And so since then, I haven't used it. But it still works immediate and it works great. I'll send you a message with the exact one I use later, because like off the top of my head, I don't remember the brand name, but I know it's a booster pump and not a submersible pump.
I believe we're going to make some of the notes available too to the members on Facebook group. So if there were more notes that you had about specific links, we'll try to make that available in the members group too.
Got it.
Then you don't have to send 5 million things out.
Fair enough.
Let's see. And then there was another couple questions about pests.
Yes. So if you saw, I use those yellow sticky like tape. I just order them off of Amazon, and I swap them out every, I would say 4 to 6 months. And they do a pretty good job at preventing any sort of like flying insects. And I am very careful when I get new plants in the mail. I always repot them into fresh soil, because I am concerned if a bad pest could take over and be something for the whole greenhouse. And I have had a problem with receiving plants that have pests on them. So I keep those isolated for, depending on the plant, a few weeks at least, just to make sure that I don't introduce something into the entire greenhouse. And then if I do find something in the greenhouse, I spray for it as soon as possible. The Bear 3-in-1 was my go-to. And then I also use this one that California Carnivorous recommends that is a permethrin. So like, what is it? Chrysanthemum-based insecticide. And that works well for most things. That as soon as I see any problems, I just hit it with that as soon as possible. The more time I spend in the greenhouse, the quicker I'm able to catch a pest, and so then the less problem it is.
Right. I think you answered the questions about temperatures. So there was,
yep.
And then there was another question about different area or separation for lowland Nepenthes.
Yeah, so I forgot, I didn't do anything in the lowland chamber. So inside that chamber, inside that greenhouse, I built a chamber with that same 6 millimeter greenhouse polyfilm. And so then that greenhouse has its own small space heater, just like I use in the other greenhouse. But it stays at above 65 degrees and usually closer to 70 degrees, even during the night, year round. Um, Even in the summer in Colorado, it cools down to like 55 almost every night of the year because I am at like 6,200 feet in elevation, that we get those very hot, dry days and then very cool nights. So it is very nice for growing highland Nepenthes.
So there's a question about whether Jeremiah mentioned a few Nepenthes that can't handle wet leaves very well. Which were those?
Yeah, so in my greenhouse, the two that I've really noticed not liking wet leaves at all are Nepenthes veitchii and Nepenthes peltata. Um, they can probably take a little water in the leaves and it wouldn't be a problem, but for me, they grow so much better like underneath that polycarbonate, and so that keeps them from having mist on their leaves whenever it mists in the greenhouse. But then I do have to manually go and water them. And sometimes I feel like small Nepenthes seedlings do a little bit better without a ton of water on their leaves. So as long as they just get enough water to keep them wet and then they dry out between waterings, that seems to help a lot.
Okay. Actually, Christian, did you get your question answered about ants and mealybugs? Is that your question? Sorry, I'm looking through all these questions and chatter in the chat box. I actually have the same problem sometimes, the ants bringing in mealies from the outside to the inside. Do you have any?
Yeah. So basically, I mean, I don't really have any problems with ants in the greenhouses. I don't know if Colorado has a lot less ants than in wherever a lot of people are from. But mealybugs, I have had problems with over the years, especially on Sarracenia. So now I just make sure to repot my Sarracenia literally my entire collection every 2 to 3 years. And if I see any mealybugs whatsoever, I immediately segregate that plant. I repot it immediately, and then spray it with, I believe it's called Safari. And it's a special mealybug insecticide that it seems to work really well on mealybugs, especially with combination of the repot. But I've never found something that's able to take them out without having to repot, especially if they're the like root mealies. And so that's again why I always repot everything that comes to me and make sure that there aren't any mealybugs hiding in the soil.
Awesome. So I'll get all the names of those things, and I'll put it in the members.
Yep.
Actually, I've never heard that particular brand. You said Safari?
Safari. It's called Safari insecticide, and it's a newer one that is designed especially for mealies. But I'd have to look and see what else it's used for. It's relatively expensive and relatively harsh, I would say, but it isn't. I think it's still a class 1 insecticide, so I think all of us could buy it without a problem.
Jeremiah, that was amazing. I'm floored.
Super glad you liked it. It was so fun. Like every other like talk or video tour I've ever done, it super focuses on the plants themselves. And I really enjoy like going to visit other collections and seeing how everyone kind of deals with certain problems that's kind of would be unique to their area. So I'm glad we came up with this as something I could do.
Maybe you could answer my question.
I'll try.
You wrote that you use Maxi at 150 ppm. Do you just how do you measure that? Is it just with a water tester, and then how do you know how much to put into the water to make 150 ppm to begin with?
So what I did originally is, so I basically will take the ppm of my water naturally, so which usually, like I said, will be about 30 to 50. And then I mixed up Maxi at the rate of 1/4 teaspoon per gallon of water. And so that usually comes out to me at about a 200 ppm reading on my little gauge. And so then if I take that, it works out to be about 150 because of the maxi. And so then I use my fertilization injector. And so I mix it up at a much higher strength. And so basically to fertilize my entire large greenhouse, it uses about 4 ounces of maxi. And so I mix that up with about a gallon of water, and then it dilutes that. And as I spray it through my main hose, it comes out the hose at about a 200 part per million, if that makes sense. But if you have much smaller collection, I just mix a 1/4 teaspoon per gallon.
I see. Okay. You place maxi in the soil then, correct?
I water it, so it completely soak everything. So that means soil, pitchers, plants. Just go through, and like I was watering with that hand hose, that's how I would then water with maxi. So I'm not particular to get it only on the soil or only in the pitchers. I just literally drench everything. Now I don't do that with the Sarracenia or the fly traps as much, but the Helium Phora seem to love it the most. Pinguicula really seem to love it. Drosera really seem to love it. Nepenthes like it quite a bit. And any Sarracenia hybrids with Purpurea or Purpurea itself love it. And I have noticed a few things that maybe don't like it as much, which it can start to degrade Nepenthes soil, so like sphagnum, over the course of a year or two. And that's why I went from using it once or twice a month to now only using it once a month.
Okay. So there's a question from David Pfefferman. Oh, actually, Alex Fu first about RO water corrosion affecting ppm when going through the pumps.
So like truthfully, I don't know that. Like when I used RO water in my greenhouse, it would literally bring the ppm to like 1-2 parts per million. Because I'm starting with relatively pure water, it would come out at almost 0 parts per million. And so the water then, I don't quite understand the whole scientific part of it, but I just know the water tries to then leach any material or any metals back into the water. So it really will pull out anything that it can, because it doesn't want to be like that pure naturally.
Thanks again, Jeremiah, for sharing your greenhouses with us. I'm sure we will definitely ask you to come back and do another talk on maybe your plants or many other things that you're involved with.
Hopefully in person.
In person would be awesome too. Yeah, that'd be great. I personally want to know more about the club that you had going there for a little bit, you know, because we're a baby club. I'm always interested in learning. So, you know, I've been connecting to BACPS and stuff, and, you know, we've been bouncing ideas and things like that. And of course, LACPS, our closest neighbors. So thank you, everybody that participated.
I have to run, but thank you so much for hosting me, guys. I really do appreciate it. And I can't wait to see some of you all in person, hopefully relatively soon.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Thank you,
See you guys later.
Nice meeting you.
Ciao.
Thanks.